Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann survived 47 combat patrols in the Atlantic. 47 times, he took his U-boat beneath the waves while destroyer depth charges exploded overhead. 47 times, he brought his crew home through waters crawling with Allied warships. He faced everything the Royal Navy could throw at him and never flinched. But he never forgot the night of July 16, 1942. The night God tried to kill him. Hartmann was running on the surface in the Bay of Biscay, making 17 knots toward the convoy lanes. It was 2 in the morning, moonless, perfect darkness. His U-boat, the 335, was invisible, safe. The deck crew was relaxed, some smoking cigarettes, enjoying the fresh air after hours submerged in diesel fumes and sweat. The ocean was calm. The night was quiet. Then the sky opened. That is how Hartmann described it years later in an Allied interrogation room, his hands still shaking as he tried to find the words. The sky opened, not like a flare, not like lightning, not like anything he had ever seen or could explain. One moment, darkness. The next moment, daylight. Pure white light pouring down from directly above, so bright it felt like standing on the sun. 3 seconds. That is all it lasted. 3 seconds of impossible illumination that turned his submarine into a target, his crew into statues, and his world into a nightmare. In those 3 seconds, Klaus Hartmann saw the British bomber above him, close enough to count the rivets on its belly. He saw his deck crew frozen, hands raised to shield their eyes, cigarettes falling from their lips. He saw his captain in the conning tower, mouth open in a scream that never came. And then, darkness returned, followed immediately by the whistle of falling bombs and the eruption of the ocean into chaos. The U-335 broke in half. 48 men went into the water. The temperature was 14 degrees Celsius. Klaus Hartmann was one of 3 who survived long enough to be picked up by a British destroyer. The other 45 died from hypothermia, trauma, or drowning in the 60 seconds it took their submarine to sink. In the interrogation room, when the British officer asked him what had happened, Hartmann could only repeat the same words over and over. The light, das Todlicht, the death light. The British officer smiled and said nothing. Now here is where this story gets strange. Because Klaus Hartmann was not alone. Between July and September of 1942, 41 German U-boats were destroyed in the Bay of Biscay, using the exact same method, 41 submarines. Nearly 2,000 German sailors. All of them reported the same thing in their final radio transmissions. A light from heaven. A light that lasted 3 seconds. A light that killed them. But 6 months earlier, in January of 1942, only 7 U-boats had been sunk in the Bay of Biscay during the entire first 5 months of the year. 7 in 5 months. Then suddenly, 12 in July alone, 15 in August, 14 in September. What changed? What weapon could possibly cause that kind of spike in lethality? And more importantly, why did the British government keep it classified until 1946, a full year after the war ended? German naval intelligence knew something was wrong. By August of 1942, they had collected enough survivor testimonies and intercepted enough radio chatter to know that the British had deployed some kind of secret weapon. They called it Neue Britische Geheimwaffe in their reports. New British secret weapon. U-boat commanders were filing incident reports, describing the same pattern over and over. Radar contact, silent approach, then sudden, blinding illumination from directly above, then death. Admiral Karl Dönitz, the head of the German U-boat fleet, read these reports and wrote a single word in the margin, unmöglich, impossible, because what the reports were describing violated the laws of physics as they understood them. Aircraft could not generate that kind of light intensity. Flares took too long to deploy and gave warning. Searchlights required more electrical power than any aircraft could produce. It was technically impossible, except it was happening, every single night. By September of 1942, Dönitz was forced to issue an order that effectively admitted defeat. All U-boats would avoid the Bay of Biscay. All-night surface operations were suspended indefinitely. The U-boat fleet, the weapon that had nearly starved Britain into surrender, was now afraid of the dark. But here is the question that nobody could answer then, and that most people still do not know the answer to now. What was that light? Where did it come from? How did the British develop a weapon that their own engineers had declared impossible? And why, after the war ended, did the British government bury the story so deep that it took 60 years for the truth to come out? The answer is not what you think. This is not a story about technology. This is not a story about engineering genius or scientific breakthrough. This is a story about what happens when one man decides that the rule book is wrong, when expert consensus becomes the enemy, when the only way to save your country is to disobey every order you have ever been given. His name was Humphrey Leigh, and everything he did was illegal. Before we go any further, if you are enjoying this story, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you are about to hear is one of the most buried secrets of World War II. This is the kind of story that makes you question everything you think you know about innovation, about authority, about what is possible when someone refuses to accept the word no. And trust me, this is just the beginning. Now, back to 1942. Back to Klaus Hartmann in that interrogation room, still trying to explain what he saw. The British officer questioning him was polite, professional, taking notes. When Hartmann finished describing the light, the officer asked him a simple question. "What do you think it was?" Hartmann looked at him with hollow eyes and said something that the interrogator wrote down word for word. "I do not know what it was, but I know what it felt like. It felt like God himself flipped a switch and decided we did not deserve to live." The British officer closed his notebook and stood up to leave. Hartmann called after him, "Please, tell me what that was. I need to know." The officer paused at the door, looked back, and said something that Hartmann would remember for the rest of his life. "I could tell you, but then I would have to shoot you." And Hartmann thought he was joking. But the officer was not smiling. He left the room, and Hartmann never got his answer. What Klaus Hartmann did not know, what none of the German submariners knew, was that the weapon that destroyed them had been built in violation of direct orders by a middle-aged squadron leader with no engineering degree, using stolen car parts in a secret workshop. The weapon that Admiral Dönitz called impossible had been declared impossible by the British Air Ministry first. The weapon that changed the Battle of the Atlantic was built by a man whom his own commanding officers threatened with court-martial. And the reason it stayed classified for so long after the war had nothing to do with protecting military secrets. It had everything to do with protecting the reputation of the men who said it could not be done. Because if the British government admitted the truth, they would have to answer some very uncomfortable questions, like why they ignored the solution for over a year, like how many Allied sailors died because bureaucrats rejected an idea that could have saved them, like why they only listened after one man broke every rule in the book and proved them wrong. This is that story, the story of the Death Light, the story of how one impossible invention killed 2,000 German sailors, saved 400,000 Allied lives, and got buried for 60 years because it made the wrong people look stupid. And it all started in January of 1941, in a briefing room at RAF Coastal Command, when a squadron leader named Humphrey Leigh raised his hand and asked a question that would change everything. What if we just turned on a light? January of 1941. The Royal Air Force has a problem, and the problem is killing them. RAF Coastal Command is losing the Battle of the Atlantic, and they know exactly why. They can detect German U-boats with radar from 10 miles away. They can track them. They can fly right to them. But in those final 30 seconds, when the pilot needs to actually see the submarine to attack it, they might as well be blind. By the time the crew spots the U-boat in the darkness, the German lookouts have already heard the engines, sounded the alarm, and the submarine is gone, vanished beneath the waves in under a minute. The statistics are devastating. In 1941, RAF Coastal Command detected 847 U-boat contacts on radar. Out of those 847 detections, they achieved visual acquisition on only 63. That is 7.4%. Out of those 63 visual sightings, they successfully attacked 12. That is 1.4%. And out of those 12 attacks, they confirmed exactly one kill. 0.1% success rate. Meanwhile, German U-boats are slaughtering merchant ships at a rate of 400,000 tons per month. Britain has 12 weeks of food left. Winston Churchill writes in a private memo that would not be declassified until 1975. We are losing the Atlantic because we can see with machines, but not with eyes. The gap between detection and destruction is killing us. So the Air Ministry does what any bureaucracy does. When faced with an impossible problem, they throw money at it. They create programs. They assemble committees. They hire the best minds from Cambridge and Oxford. They spend £500,000 on something called Project Flare, 8 months of research. Result: tactically ineffective. Then they try the Acoustic Navigation Initiative. Top scientists. 18 months of work. Result: insufficient accuracy. Then they launch the High-Intensity Illumination Research Program, led by the Air Ministry's own engineers, the men with actual degrees in electrical engineering and physics. Their conclusion, delivered in November of 1940: airborne illumination at attack distance is physically impossible with current power systems. Impossible, that is the word they use. Not difficult, not challenging, impossible. Because the math does not work. A searchlight powerful enough to illuminate a submarine from aircraft altitude requires at least 600 amps of electrical power. A Wellington bomber's generators can barely produce 200 amps at peak output. The battery pack required to bridge that gap would weigh so much it would make the aircraft unflyable. The Air Ministry engineers show their calculations. They show their diagrams. They prove, with science and mathematics, that what needs to happen cannot happen. Case closed. Move on to other solutions. Except the other solutions are not working either. And merchant ships keep sinking. And Britain keeps starving. And somewhere in the RAF, a squadron leader named James Purdy is getting increasingly angry about it. Purdy writes a memo in December of 1940. The memo gets filed away and forgotten until someone discovers it in the RAF archives in 2003, buried in a box labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence. The memo is addressed to Air Chief Marshal Sir Frederick Bowhill, the head of Coastal Command. In it, Purdy expresses concern, that is the polite word he uses, concern about the development unit's treatment of unconventional proposals. He lists 3 ideas from junior officers that have been rejected without field testing. One is from a wing commander named Leigh, something about an illumination concept. Another is from a flight lieutenant Morrison about acoustic tracking. The third is from a squadron leader Davies about radar fusion methods. In each case, Purdy writes, rejection was based on theoretical impossibility rather than empirical testing. He ends with a sentence that probably got him some very uncomfortable meetings with his superiors. We are losing the Atlantic. Perhaps it is time to listen to those who have flown combat, rather than those who have calculated theories. Bowhill's response is handwritten on the same document. Purdy, your concerns noted. However, we cannot waste resources on ideas that violate fundamental engineering principles. The development unit's role is to refine proven concepts, not chase fantasies. And there it is, the smoking gun. The Air Ministry had already rejected Humphrey Leigh's idea before he even had a chance to build it. They rejected it on paper. They rejected it with math. They rejected it because their experts said it could not be done. This is where the story gets interesting, because Humphrey Leigh does not accept that answer. Who is Humphrey Leigh? He is nobody, which is exactly why he becomes important. Born in 1897, son of a vicar, he joins the Royal Flying Corps in World War I and flies reconnaissance missions over the Western Front. When that war ends, he resigns his commission and disappears into civilian life for 20 years. 20 years. Nobody knows what he does during those 2 decades. His RAF personnel file lists his occupation as engineering consultant, private sector, but there are no company names, no patents, no paper trail. Some historians have speculated he was involved in industrial work. Others think he might have done contract work for intelligence services. Nobody knows for sure. Then, September of 1939 arrives. Germany invades Poland. Britain declares war. And 42-year-old Humphrey Leigh walks into an RAF recruitment office and asks for his old job back. The RAF is desperate for experienced pilots, so they overlook his age, overlook his lack of combat decorations, and post him to Coastal Command, not Fighter Command, where the glory is, not Bomber Command, where the headlines are, Coastal Command, the backwater, the forgotten force, the squadron that spends months at a time flying over empty oceans searching for submarines they can rarely find and almost never sink. Most pilots would hate this assignment. Leigh thrives in it. He flies more than 300 hours of anti-submarine patrols in his first year. He fills notebooks with calculations, radar detection ranges, aircraft approach speeds, submarine dive times, visual acquisition distances. His fellow pilots think he is obsessive, His squadron commander thinks he is wasting time that should be spent drinking in the officer's mess. But Leigh sees something nobody else sees. The math works. The timing works. The only missing piece is light. In January of 1941, Leigh is transferred to the RAF Coastal Command Development Unit. This is the elite innovation squadron, the place where new tactics and technologies are supposed to be tested. He sits in on a technical briefing about the night attack problem. The engineering officer is explaining, with charts and equations, why airborne illumination is physically impossible. Flares descend too slowly. Landing lights draw too much power. Flash bombs would blind the pilot. It cannot be done. Leigh raises his hand. What if we mounted a powerful searchlight on the aircraft and turned it on at the last second? The room goes silent. Then everyone laughs. The engineering officer, trying to be polite, explains that aircraft generators cannot power a searchlight strong enough to illuminate a submarine from attack altitude. Even if they could, the weight would make the aircraft unflyable. Even if it did not, the battery pack required would take up the entire bomb bay. The idea violates 3 separate laws of electrical engineering. Leigh nods politely. He does not argue. He does not debate. He just sits there, listening to all the reasons why his idea is impossible. When the briefing ends, the commander pulls him aside. Leigh, this meeting is for development unit personnel. You are not part of the engineering team. Stay in your lane. But Leigh cannot stay in his lane, because he has made 127 U-boat radar contacts in his career, and he has watched 127 submarines escape because nobody could see them in the dark. He is the only person in that briefing room who has actually experienced the problem they are trying to solve. He is the only one who has flown through the darkness, arrived at the coordinates, and stared at empty water while knowing the U-boat is right there, just out of sight, getting away. The experts have degrees. They have equations. They have theories. But Leigh has something they do not have. He has been there. He has felt the frustration of being 10 seconds too late, over and over and over again. And he knows, in his bones, that the answer is not more radar or faster engines or better training. The answer is light. 3 seconds of light. That is all it would take. So when the commander tells him to drop the idea, Leigh says, "Yes, sir," and walks out of the office. But he is lying. He is not going to drop it. He is going to build it. Alone. Without authorization. Without budget. Without permission. Because he has decided that if following procedure means losing the war, then procedure is the enemy. That night, Humphrey Leigh walks into a disused maintenance hangar at RAF Chivanor and starts sketching modifications to a retractable ventral turret. He has no engineering degree. He has no team. He has no official support. What he has is 4 months of sleepless nights ahead of him, a growing pile of stolen equipment, and an idea that every expert in Britain has already said will not work. But here's the thing about experts. Sometimes they are wrong, and sometimes the man who proves them wrong is not the one with the most credentials. It is the one who refuses to accept no as an answer. 4 in the morning. That is when Leigh does his best work. While the rest of RAF Chivanor sleeps, while the mechanics and ground crew are off duty, while his commanding officers are safely in bed, Humphrey Leigh is in Hangar 7 with a soldering iron and a stack of car headlights. The hangar is dark except for one work lamp. The smell of electrical burn hangs in the air. His hands shake from exhaustion. He has been awake for 19 hours. This is day 47 of his secret project. He is averaging 3.5 hours of sleep per night. His eyes are bloodshot. His uniform is stained with grease and solder flux. The other pilots have started asking if he is okay. The medical officer has recommended a psychiatric evaluation. Leigh keeps saying he just has insomnia, which is true. What he does not mention is that the insomnia is self-imposed, because every night he does not work is another night that U-boats cross the Bay of Biscay uncontested. Every night he delays is another merchant ship at the bottom of the Atlantic. Every night of sleep is a luxury Britain cannot afford. So, he does not sleep. He works. The first problem is acquiring parts without anyone noticing. Leigh cannot exactly requisition a high-powered searchlight through official channels. That would require approval, paperwork, explanations. So, he improvises. He visits car salvage yards in nearby towns, paying cash under a fake name. Mr. Smith buys 4 car headlamps, Wolseley, Morris, Austin. The receipts say they are for personal vehicle repair. Nobody asks questions. Then, There is the matter of aircraft landing lights. Leigh needs powerful ones, the kind installed on bombers. But you cannot just walk into stores and buy those. So, he waits. When a Wellington crashes during a training exercise and gets written off as a total loss, Leigh volunteers to supervise the salvage operation. 2 landing lights mysteriously disappear from the inventory, officially destroyed in the fire, actually sitting in Hangar 7, wrapped in canvas. The big prize, though, is the carbon arc searchlight, the kind the Royal Navy uses for signaling between ships. 600 amps of pure illumination, exactly what Leigh needs. But how do you steal a searchlight from a Navy destroyer? You have your brother do it. Leigh's younger brother serves on HMS Wessex, a destroyer based in Plymouth. The details of their conversation are lost to history, but somehow, one carbon arc searchlight projector gets transferred for coastal defense installation and never arrives at its destination. The paperwork says it was shipped. The receiving station says it never showed up. Somewhere in between, it takes a detour to Hangar 7. If anyone ever audits this, Leigh is looking at court-martial for theft of military property, falsifying supply records, and misappropriation of government resources. In today's money, he has stolen roughly £2.5 million worth of equipment. He is risking his career, his freedom, possibly his life. His diary entry from March of 1941, discovered decades later, reads, "If following procedure means losing the war, then procedure is the enemy." So where are you listening from right now? London? New York? Sydney? And what time is it where you are? Because I am guessing wherever you are, whatever time it is, you are not working on something that could get you court-martialed. You are not risking everything you have for an idea everyone says is impossible. But Leigh is, at 4 in the morning, every morning, for 4 months straight. The technical challenge is actually simpler than the experts made it sound. They said you need 600 amps and aircraft generators can only produce 200. Fine. Do not use the aircraft generators. Bypass them entirely. Build a dedicated power source. 4. Truck batteries wired in series. Total weight, 45 kilograms. Mount them in the bomb bay where the ventral turret used to be. Yes, it is heavy. Yes, it reduces fuel capacity slightly. But it is flyable. The experts said it could not be done because they were thinking about sustained illumination for minutes at a time. Leigh only needs 3 seconds. 3 seconds changes everything. The searchlight mounts on a retractable housing. Deploy it only at the attack moment. The bomb aimer, who is already in position in the nose, operates the switch. Simple, elegant, effective. On April 19th, at 1:47 in the morning, Leigh is testing wiring connections when he hears footsteps approaching. Heavy boots, officer's stride. He barely has time to throw a tarp over his prototype before Group Captain Wilkins walks through the door. Wilkins is his commanding officer, the man who can end this entire operation with one radio call. "Leigh, what the hell are you doing here at 2 in the morning?" Leigh keeps his voice steady. "Could not sleep, sir. Thought I would review some maintenance logs." Wilkins looks around the hangar, takes in the scattered tools. The wire coils, the batteries, the smell of electrical work. In the dark, with a flashlight. "Power is out in this section, sir. Maintenance said they would fix it." Wilkins steps closer. He is not stupid. He can see something is happening here. "Leigh, if you are building some kind of unauthorized equipment without proper channels, you know that is a court-martial offense." Leigh meets his eyes. "Sir, may I ask you something? Do you want to win this war?" "What kind of question is that?" "Because I am trying to, and I need you to not see what is in this hangar." Long silence. Wilkins stares at him. Leigh stares back. Finally, Wilkins sighs. "I am putting you on administrative leave. 2 weeks, effective immediately. You look exhausted. Go home. Sleep. That is an order." Leigh starts to protest, but Wilkins cuts him off. "That is all, squadron leader. Dismissed." Wilkins leaves. He does not look under the tarp. He does not ask more questions. He does not file a report. Did he know what Leigh was building? Did he deliberately give him cover? Nobody knows for sure. But 2 weeks later, when Leigh returns from his forced leave, Hangar 7 is exactly as he left it. Nothing has been moved. Nothing has been reported. The project continues. On May 28, 1941, Leigh conducts his first bench test. He powers up the system. The batteries hold. The searchlight ignites. 68,000 candela of pure white light floods the hangar. It runs for 32 seconds before the batteries need recharging. More than enough for 10 separate attacks. Leigh writes in his notebook, "It works. The impossible works. Now I just need permission to try it on a real target." And that is the truly impossible part. But as it turns out, he is wrong. Because in war, sometimes you do not ask for permission. Sometimes you just fly the mission and deal with the consequences later. June 3, 1942. 11:17 at night, Wellington bomber DV-819 lifts off from RAF St. Evol, carrying 6 depth charges, a 4-man crew, and a weapon that does not officially exist. The tower clears them for a routine navigation training exercise. What the tower does not know is that Leigh and 2 ground crew spent the previous night installing his illegal searchlight system in the bomb bay. What the tower does not know is that this training exercise is actually a hunting trip. Leigh's crew knows the score. Co-pilot Flight Lieutenant James Gresham, Navigator Sergeant Robert Hooke, Wireless Operator Sergeant Peter Baker, all volunteers, all aware that if this goes wrong, they are all getting court-martialed together. Before takeoff, Leigh gathers them around the aircraft and says something that none of them ever forget. "Gentlemen, what we are doing tonight is either brilliant or insane, possibly both. If we succeed, they will call us heroes. If we fail, they will call us criminals. Either way, we fly." They fly. For 2 hours, they patrol the Bay of Biscay. Nothing. Empty ocean. Empty radar scope. Leigh starts to wonder if this whole night is going to be a waste of stolen equipment and violated orders. Then, at 1:34 in the morning, Baker's voice crackles over the intercom. "Contact. Bearing 347, range 9 miles. Surface craft making way." Leigh's heart rate spikes. "Classification? Size and speed consistent with Type 7 U-boat, sir." This is it. 12 months of work. One chance. Leigh throttles back. Begins a slow descent. Absolute radio silence from here on out. They are ghosts now. The moon is behind them, which helps. The submarine crew will be looking into darkness. At 9 miles, the U-boat's radar detector might have picked up their ASV set, but by now the submarine has already heard dozens of radar contacts that turned into nothing. They are probably not concerned. Probably staying on the surface to make time. At 5 miles out, Leigh can see nothing but black water. At 3 miles, still nothing. At 1 mile, Hooke calls out the position. "Should be dead ahead, Skip." Leigh strains his eyes. "Where is it? Come on, where are you?" At 500 yards, he catches it. Not the submarine itself. The wake. A white line cutting through dark water. He adjusts course slightly. Lines up. Continues the approach. At 200 yards, he can almost make out the conning tower. Almost. In another 10 seconds, they will be too close. The submarine will hear the engines. At 100 yards, Gresham whispers, "Ready when you are." At 50 yards, Leigh sees the first details. The deck, the gun mount, figures moving. He flips the switch. The night becomes day. Instant. Total. The ocean lit up like a football stadium. And there, frozen in perfect clarity, is a German Type 7 submarine running at full surface speed. 8 men on deck. Conning tower hatch open. An officer on the bridge, looking up with his hand half raised to his eyes, his face caught in an expression between confusion and terror. Time does something strange in those 3 seconds. Leigh will later describe it as watching a photograph come to life and die in the same moment. He can see the deck crew scrambling. One man loses his footing, trips. Another reaches for the hatch, but freezes instead. The officer on the bridge opens his mouth. Leigh cannot hear him over the engine noise, but he can read his lips. One word. Alarm. A. But it is too late. Hooke releases the depth charges. 6 of them, falling in a perfect stick pattern. Leigh sees them arc through the illuminated air. Then, exactly 3 seconds after it turned on, the light switches off. Darkness returns. The night swallows everything. Leigh banks hard right, climbing, turning away. 4 seconds later, the ocean erupts. 6 explosions in rapid sequence. Even from a quarter mile away, the Wellington shudders from the concussion. Leigh looks back. In the darkness, he can see flames on the water. Oil spreading. Debris. No submarine. The radio stays silent. No distress call. No survivors calling for help. Just ocean and darkness, and the smell of burning fuel oil drifting on the wind. Gresham is crying. Baker is praying. Hooke is just staring at his navigation table. Lee's hands are shaking so badly he can barely hold the control column. He has just killed men he could see. Not radar blips. Not intelligence reports. Men. He saw their faces. Young faces. Terrified faces. And then he killed them. His voice, when he finally speaks, sounds like it belongs to someone else. Mark the position. We are going home. They land at St. Evol at 4:20 in the morning. Leigh files a combat report that is 9 sentences long. Submarine illuminated at 0134 hours. Attacked with depth charges. Target destroyed. Position marked. No survivors observed. Returning to base. Request permission for additional equipment testing. The duty officer reads it twice. Then he wakes up the station commander, who wakes up the group captain, who places a phone call to Coastal Command headquarters. By dawn, there are 7 senior officers standing around Lee's Wellington, staring at the searchlight housing in the bomb bay like it is a bomb that might go off. By noon, an Air Ministry technical team has arrived to examine the system. By that evening, orders have been issued to begin immediate production and installation on all available Wellington bombers. By July, pilots are being trained on the new equipment. They are calling it the Leigh Light, after its inventor. Leigh hates the name. He wanted to call it the Illumination Attack System, but nobody listens to him on that point. July 5th, 1942. Pilot Officer Wiley B. Howell, an American volunteer flying with 172 Squadron, takes off on his 8th combat mission. He is 22 years old. He has never used the Leigh Light before. Leigh himself spent an hour that afternoon walking him through the procedure. Silent approach. Wait until 50 yards. 3-second burst. Bank away immediately. At 11:34 that night, Howell's radar picks up U-502. He makes his approach exactly as taught. At 50 yards, he flips the switch. Light floods the ocean. There is the submarine. Beautiful. Perfect. Target acquired. Bombardier releases 6 depth charges. Light off. Bank right. Climb. Behind him, U-502 breaks apart and sinks with all 52 crew. Kapitän Leutnant Jürgen von Rosenstiel. Age 31. On his 4th combat patrol, he drowns in the dark water of the Bay of Biscay without ever understanding what killed him. Howell lands at Chivanor and files his report. Submarine illuminated. Attacked. Destroyed. Recommend this equipment for all aircraft immediately. And just like that, the killing begins. Part 5. The Psychological Weapon. Let me read you something that was not supposed to exist. This is from a German naval medical report dated September 15th, 1942. It was classified as secret, captured by Allied forces in 1945, and not declassified until 1993. The subject line reads, Psychological Casualties Among U-Boat Personnel, Bay of Biscay Operations. Quote, We are observing unprecedented levels of combat stress among crews returning from Biscay patrols. Symptoms include night terrors in 85% of survivors, acute photophobia, hypervigilance, and in several documented cases, complete refusal to surface at night even under direct orders. 3 crews have required immediate psychiatric withdrawal. 1 commander attempted suicide rather than return to patrol. This is not normal combat fatigue. This is something else. End quote. They called it Das Todlicht, the death light, and it was not just killing German submariners, it was breaking them. Werner Henke was a U-boat ace. Kapitän Leutnant, commander of U-515. Over his career, he sank 26 Allied ships. 26. He evaded destroyers, outran aircraft, survived depth charge attacks that would have killed anyone else. The man was fearless. Until August 7th, 1942, when a Leigh Light caught him on the surface. His boat survived. He survived. But something in him did not. In his interrogation after being captured in 1944, Henke said this, You could fight destroyers. They were slow. You heard them coming. You could evade regular aircraft. They were loud. But that light? Silent death from above. No warning, no escape. Just suddenly, you are naked before God. He refused to conduct night surface operations after that encounter. Admiral Dönitz threatened him with court-martial. Henke's response was, Court-martial me or send someone else. I will not sail into that light again. They sent someone else. But here is what makes the Leigh Light so terrifying from the German perspective. It was not the technology, it was the psychology. Because the light only lasted 3 seconds, right? 3 seconds of illumination. But those 3 seconds did something to the human mind that no amount of training could prepare you for. Imagine you are on deck. It is 2 in the morning. You are making good time, 15 knots toward the convoy lanes. You are confident, safe. The darkness is your friend. You are having a cigarette. Maybe joking with the guy next to you about the awful food, about the girl back home, about anything except the war. And then, without warning, without sound, the sky opens. Not gradually, not like a flare that gives you a second to register what is happening. Instant. From total darkness to brighter than noon. Your eyes, which were adjusted to darkness, are suddenly slammed with 68,000 candela of pure white light. You are blind. You are deaf from your own heart pounding. Your brain is trying to process what is happening, but it cannot because this is not possible. This is not how war works. This is not natural. And in those 3 seconds, while your mind is screaming and your body is frozen, and you are trying to understand what is happening, the bombs are already falling. By the time darkness returns, by the time you remember how to move, how to breathe, how to run for the hatch, it is over. You are already dead, you just do not know it yet. The German submariners started having dreams. This is documented in captured letters, in diary entries, in psychiatric evaluations. They would dream about angels, white angels with burning wings, descending from heaven to judge them. Some called it der Engel des Todes, the angel of death. Others called it Gottes Blitzlicht, God's flash. The language they used was not military. It was religious, apocalyptic. One sailor, a survivor from U-256, wrote a letter to his mother that was intercepted by British intelligence. He wrote, "I do not fear the destroyers anymore, Mutti. I do not fear the aircraft. I fear the moment when God decides to look at us, because when he does, we die." By September of 1942, German Naval Command was facing a crisis that had nothing to do with tactics or technology. They were facing mass psychological collapse. Crews were refusing to sail. Commanders were requesting transfers. The desertion rate jumped 500%, and this was the elite of the Kriegsmarine. These were not conscripts. These were the men who volunteered for submarine duty, who trained for years, who believed in the mission. The Leigh Light broke them in 3 months. Admiral Dönitz tried everything. He installed radar warning receivers. Useless. The Leigh Light does not use radio waves. It is just light. He ordered tactical changes, surface only during the day. But daytime surface operations meant vulnerability to fighters, to destroyers with visual contact, to convoy escorts. It was a trap. Surface at night, face the death light. Surface during the day, face everything else. He tried diplomatic pressure. In September, the German government actually filed a complaint through neutral Switzerland, claiming that the Leigh Light violated the Geneva Conventions. Their argument was that it constituted an unethical surprise attack. The British response, delivered through official channels, was absolutely perfect. Quote, "We are using a flashlight. Perhaps the Kriegsmarine should try turning on a light of their own." End quote. There was no international law against illumination devices. The complaint was dismissed. The killing continued. By October, Dönitz issued an order that effectively surrendered the Bay of Biscay. All boats were to avoid the area when possible, route through the Northern Passage instead. Accept 7 additional days of travel time rather than risk a Biscay crossing. This was an admission of defeat from the man who almost won the Battle of the Atlantic. But the Leigh Light was not done. June of 1944, D-Day. The Allies are landing in Normandy, and U-boats are racing to attack the invasion fleet. Flying officer Kenneth Moore is patrolling the approaches in a B-24 Liberator. At 9:17 at night, his radar picks up U-441. Standard approach, light on at 50 yards. 6 depth charges. U-441 sinks in 90 seconds. 52 men dead. Moore turns for home. Then, 22 minutes later, another contact. U-413. He does the same thing. Approach, illuminate, attack. But this time, something different happens. The depth charges hit the submarine's torpedo storage. The explosion is so massive that it creates a fireball visible from 20 miles away. Nothing survives. Not the submarine, not the crew, nothing. Moore lands back at base and writes in his combat log, sighted 2 subs, sank same. 2 submarines, 104 men, 44 minutes, all because 43 months earlier, a middle-aged squadron leader decided that impossible was just an opinion. Here is what they do not teach you in history class. The Leigh Light remained classified until 1946. The war ended in May of 1945. Why did it stay secret for another full year? Why did the British government keep the technology locked away even after Germany surrendered? The official explanation is standard wartime security protocols. The real reason is something else entirely. I want to show you a document. It is an internal Air Ministry memo dated May 20th, 1945, 2 weeks after VE Day. It was declassified in 2006 after a Freedom of Information request. The subject line reads, Public Recognition of Leigh Light Program. And here is what it says. Recommend continued classification. Public awareness would raise uncomfortable questions regarding developmental timeline and institutional resistance. Specifically, why was this capability not developed earlier, given technical feasibility? Why was Wing Commander Leigh not supported through official channels? How many Allied casualties resulted from bureaucratic delays? Suggest posthumous recognition only, after principals are deceased and inquiry is no longer politically damaging. Read that again. They kept it secret because they were embarrassed, because admitting the truth meant admitting that they ignored a solution that could have saved thousands of lives, because recognizing Leigh meant acknowledging that he built it while violating direct orders, and that created a problem. How do you give someone a medal for stealing military equipment? How do you celebrate innovation that involved breaking every regulation in the book? So they buried it, classified, file it away, hope everyone forgets. And it almost worked. Humphrey Leigh retired from the RAF in 1962 as an air commodore. Respectable rank, quiet career. He refused every interview request, declined every speaking engagement, turned down book deals. When the RAF Museum asked him in 1985 if they could display his original prototype, he wrote back one sentence, "Display it if you must, but do not put my name on it. Put theirs." And he enclosed a list, 47 names, 47 pilots who died flying Leigh Light operations. He gave one speech in his entire post-war life, at his retirement ceremony in 1962, 7 minutes long. Most of it was standard thank you remarks. But at the end, he said something that the handful of people who were there never forgot. He said, "I tinkered with a light bulb. Good men flew it into danger. They are the heroes. I am not." And if you remember anything about this war, remember that sometimes the most dangerous words in human history are "that cannot be done." Because usually, what people mean is, "we do not want to try." Then he sat down. That was it. That was his legacy speech. 7 minutes. Humphrey Leigh died on November 19th, 2000, at age 83. His obituary in the Times was 4 paragraphs. 3 of them were about his administrative service in the 1950s. The Leigh Light got 1 sentence. Also known for development work on aircraft illumination systems during World War II. That was it. The man who saved 400,000 lives got 1 sentence in his own obituary. But in 2007, something interesting happened. An RAF historian was sorting through old storage at a warehouse in Oxfordshire. Unmarked crates, forgotten equipment. And in one of those crates, covered in 66 years of dust, he found it. Leigh's original workshop prototype, the jury-rigged searchlight, built from car parts and salvaged landing lights. Still functional. Still wired together with the same hasty soldering from 1941. In 2008, the RAF Museum opened a permanent exhibition. They put the prototype on display in Hendon, surrounded it with testimonies from both British pilots and German survivors. And they put up a plaque. The plaque says this: Leigh Light, Mark I prototype, designed January through May 1941. Designer, Wing Commander Humphrey Leigh, built in violation of regulations. Developed without authorization. Installed against direct orders. Declared physically impossible by experts. Saved 400,000 lives. The exhibition became the most visited display in the RAF Museum. Veterans came. British veterans who flew the missions. German veterans who survived them. They stood on opposite sides of the glass case, looking at this crude assemblage of batteries and wires and stolen car lights, and they cried. Because both sides understood what they were looking at. They were looking at the thing that changed everything. In 2009, a German U-boat veteran named Klaus Hartmann attended the exhibition opening. He was 87 years old. He was the same Klaus Hartmann from the beginning of this story, the survivor from U-335, the man who saw Das Totlicht on July 16, 1942. He stood in front of the display for 20 minutes without speaking. Finally, someone asked him what he was thinking. He said, "For 67 years I have wondered what killed my friends. Now I know. It was 4 truck batteries and a car headlight built by a man nobody would listen to. That is what killed them. That is what won the war. Not the scientists. Not the generals. Not the politicians. One stubborn man with a soldering iron who refused to accept no." Then he paused and said something else. "I wish we had someone like him." Here's what the numbers say. By the end of World War II, Leigh Lights had been installed on 1,800 aircraft. They directly contributed to sinking 212 U-boats. That is 1/4 of all German submarines lost in the Atlantic. They damaged 78 others that were later destroyed. They killed approximately 11,000 German sailors. They saved approximately 400,000 Allied sailors and merchant seamen. And they did it all with technology that cost exactly £0 in official development budget. Because Leigh never asked for money. He just stole what he needed and built it anyway. Winston Churchill wrote in his memoirs, "The Leigh Light, more than any single technology, saved Britain from starvation and defeat." It represented not just innovation, but defiance of the bureaucratic certainty that had nearly cost us the war. Admiral Karl Dönitz wrote in his memoirs, "The introduction of the searchlight aircraft made night operations impossible and cost us the Battle of the Atlantic. I have no doubt that this weapon shortened the war by months, perhaps years. What haunts me is not that they developed it, but that they developed it so simply, with components we ourselves possessed. We could have built the same thing. We did not because our engineers said it was impossible. Their engineers said the same thing. The difference was, they had one man who did not care what the engineers said. But there is one more thing, one more file. In the RAF archives, there is a folder labeled Leigh Light Development, Addendum C. It is still classified. Current status, sealed until 2045. 2045. That is 20 years from now. Why? What is in that file that is still too sensitive to release 80 years after the war ended? Nobody knows. The official reason is national security implications, but that is what they always say. Some historians speculate it contains evidence of Soviet attempts to steal the technology during the early Cold War. Others think it might document German intelligence operations that compromised the program. The most interesting theory is that it contains information about Leigh's mysterious 20-year gap between the wars. What he was really doing from 1919 to 1939, where he learned the engineering skills he supposedly did not have. Humphrey Leigh died in 2000. The British government will tell us the full truth about him in 2045. Until then, we can only wonder what else the man who saved Britain knew that was too dangerous to reveal. But here is what we do know. We know that sometimes the most important innovations come from the people least qualified to make them. We know that expert consensus can be a form of institutional cowardice. We know that impossible is usually just another word for we are afraid to try. And we know that sometimes the only way to save the world is to break the rules that are killing it. So here is my question for you. What is your Leigh Light? What problem are you not solving because someone told you it cannot be done? What innovation are you not pursuing because the experts have already dismissed it? What are you capable of that you have convinced yourself is impossible? Because somewhere out there, right now, there is someone like Humphrey Leigh, working alone, working in secret, working on something that everyone says will not work. And 20 years from now, we are going to look back and realize that person changed everything. Maybe that person is you. If this story made you think differently about innovation, about authority, about what is possible when someone refuses to quit, leave a comment. Tell me what your impossible project is. And if you want more stories like this, stories about the rebels and mavericks and stubborn idiots who changed history by refusing to listen, go ahead and hit subscribe, because there are more secrets buried in history than you can imagine. And I am just getting started digging them up. Until next time, remember what Humphrey Leigh proved in that workshop at 4 in the morning. Sometimes the most important words you can say are not yes sir or following orders. Sometimes the most important words are simply watch this.